Identity is the qualities, beliefs, personality, and/or expressions that make up a person or a group. One can regard the awareness or the categorization of an identity as destructive or positive. A psychological identity relates to self-image, self-esteem, and individuality. In society, our identity is a huge deal. It's how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others to view us. It's a mental construct of the self that no two people share, since no two people think the exact same thing about one particular person. Our identity can be shaped by a wide plethora of factors like our religion, political views, personality, relationships, occupation, goals, and many other things. Our name is one way that our identity can be shared and identified, and collective beliefs about a particular identity are known as a reputation. As the actions we engage in increase, so does the complexity of our identity. If one person steals from others, he'll be judged as a bad person. But if he does so, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, he becomes this sort of Robin Hood-like figure, and his morality becomes that bit more ambiguous. Our self-identity is ever growing and changing throughout our lives, if we choose to let it. If identity is left rigid and stagnant, it can lack the fluidity to adapt to changes in the social climate. Each person has a field of awareness known as consciousness, and this is filtered by the ego and personal identity. Information that is received and not consciously registered is sent to the unconscious mind. This unconscious mind is a set of underlying schemas that contribute to our judgments, our thoughts and feelings, and our decisions. And this sort of unconscious material can manifest as we sleep in our dreams. In a broader sense, society itself has an ego, a consciousness, and an unconscious. This is known as the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is a term coined by famous psychologist Carl Jung, and they are present everywhere in gender norms, laws, social etiquette, and the standard status quo. It contains inherited elements that all humans share, like instincts and impulses, which are not acquired but are innate in our psychology. From here, we can find archetypes. Archetypes are cognitive categories or predispositions that humans behave on, with their thoughts, perceptions, and their actions. Examples being the hero, the explorer, the lover, the soldier, and the warrior. Repetition of these patterns of behavior have been engraved in our psyche, leading to these archetypes and modes of behavior being repeated across time and even cultures. These archetypes plus the uniqueness of the individual can contribute to one's identity. A coveted identity in most societies is one of status. It's one of the reasons why people buy expensive cars and watches. From a psychosexual perspective, status is more attractive to the opposite sex and can reap a number of social rewards. It's so prolific and powerful that politics regarding identity are extremely controversial, as what one identifies with can be a means of rallying behind a particular cause or protest in order to gain some form of social justice, but I won't really go into that here. The scale of an identity can even reach a national level, where a country's culture, norms, and way of life can form its character, and a patriot is one that relentlessly supports that identity. Some will support it with their lives, and many have. In effect, war is the battle between collective identities and egos. If this wasn't the case, people wouldn't defend what they know to be the right way of life. We can see this in the last century between the USSR and the USA during the Cold War, where one was looking to find a greater sphere of influence than the other, all in all a stronger global identity. This is all well and good, but what about the individual, the archetypal soldiers, patriots, and the ones that bear the full brunt of the warfare and the espionage? These are the ones that are damaged physically and mostly psychologically from the horrors of war. One of the most common mental disorders that soldiers suffer from after war is post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as PTSD. This is also known as shell shock or combat stress, and it occurs after you experience a very traumatic life event or situation. It's normal for your body and your mind to be in shock after an event has just happened, but the normal response for PTSD sufferers is that the nervous system gets stuck. In this stuck state, many veterans re-experience the horrors of war like mentally it was happening all over again, leading to severely negative and distressing thoughts, as well as a heightened physiological response like heightened stress and anxiety, and fear. These front lines are a nightmarish environment where a lot of these soldiers, a lot of these veterans don't come back in the same state. Another aspect of war is espionage, where a soldier infiltrates the homeland of an enemy in order to obtain crucial information that would turn the tide of war. To do this, a spy must seamlessly blend in with the rest of its inhabitants. They must cultivate another persona, another identity. What if the spy in question filled out his role so well, he started to believe that this was actually who he was and momentarily forgot the purpose of why he was there in the first place? What if simply just acting the part, this new identity became another part of his psyche? What if he had dissociative identity disorder as a result? Dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder. Someone diagnosed with the ID might be uncertain of their identity or who they are. They feel the presence of other identities, voices, names, personal histories, and experiences. Reiner Braun from Attack on Titan is a warrior from the nation of Mali and is tasked with infiltrating the Eldian land of Paradis in order to obtain and retrieve the founding Titan. To do this, he must act as a soldier but be a warrior in disguise. But with time, mentally he starts to break and he no longer knows what's right anymore due to being with the enemy for way too long. How did that happen? Well, in this video we will look into the mind of Reiner Braun and analyze how he ended up a complete wreck after the mission, as we dive into the psychology of Reiner Braun, Two Broken Men.
Motivate to motivate, spit till I suffocate, very quick to agitate, concentrate till I rate, I'm irate, in a state, my confidence is a trait, success is my motherfucking fate!
まあ、アレ人だからエルディア人と一緒にはいられないんだよ。まあ、アレ人に生まれていれば。
Reiner Braun grew up in the intimate zone in the nation of Mali. Born to a mother of Eldian descent, Reiner's heritage was that of half Eldian and Malian. Due to how the Eldians were received by history, they were treated as second-class citizens, but they were able to obtain a honorary Malian status by demonstrating their loyalty and allegiance to Mali. As a consequence of the shunned mixing of races, Reiner's father left when he was born, as his relationship with Reiner's mother was illegal. Mainly, he was terrified of being killed by the Malian government for his action. Thus, he abandoned his lover and newly born son. This obviously meant that Reiner grew up without a father. There are numerous studies documenting the effects of a young man growing up without a father figure. These include, but are not limited to, low self-esteem, more prone to anger and depression, emotional distress, and are generally more prone to committing suicide. Much of this boils down to the sadness and rejection of an absent father, and feeling as though that they are unloved. Sadly, stats show that boys without fathers are 4.6 times more likely to take their own lives at some point. Unfortunately, this is only part of the trauma that Reiner experienced as a young child. His relationship with his father was the brittle foundation that the rest of his life would be built upon. In actual fact, this poor start was where Reiner gained his motivation from. He wanted to become a warrior for Mali to show his loyalty and become an honorary Malian, despite never being that gifted in combat. In his eyes, achieving this status would grant him his father's acknowledgement, with that, his love. The Theory of Attachment by John Bowlby points out how crucial it is for an infant to have at least one strong emotional bond before the age of 5, after the critical and sensitive periods. This ensures that we can feel safe, protected and secure, and acts as a role model for future relationships later in life. Reiner did have his mother, but as we mentioned, not having his father imprinted the feeling of rejection into Reiner's psyche from a young age. And these are reflected in factors like his low self-esteem, potentially leading to the broken stage that he's at later in his life. As I mentioned, Reiner wanting to be a warrior was motivated by him desiring acknowledgement from his nation, but mostly his father. The warriors in question were children that would inherit a titan, which only gives them 13 years to live as a price for the immense power. These warriors were to be sent to Paradis, where these so-called devils would live, in order to obtain the founding titan in order to shift the tide of war into one side, into the favor of Mali. As stated earlier, Reiner didn't really have any distinguishing traits or anything really special about him that made him suitable to inherit the Armored Titan. Despite this, he was actually chosen to inherit the Armored Titan in the end, which gave him a newfound sense of pride and confidence. The team selected for the mission consisted of Reiner Braun, Bert Holt Hoover, Annie Leonhardt, and Marcel Galliard, who was like the leader of the group. Unfortunately for Reiner though, it was actually revealed that he was not selected for his skills as a warrior. What actually happened was that Marco made it seem as though that his younger brother wasn't suited for it, so he wouldn't inherit the Titan, so he wasn't doomed to that fate. He wanted to protect his younger brother, Porco, pretty much. He managed to make the original intended recipient of the Titan, Reiner, instead. This is revealed after the mission begins, and his novel feeling of self-efficacy is shattered. Not only this, but before Reiner leaves to Paradis, and after he gains his status as an honorary Marleyan, he finds his father and proclaims this to him. But adding to his pain and trauma, his father is visibly terrified and rejects his own son's very presence. From this scenario, Reiner is mentally faced with a lot of self-doubt and maybe a case of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is loosely defined as doubting your own abilities and feeling like you're a fraud. It disproportionately affects high-achieving people who find it difficult to accept their accomplishments. Many question whether they're even deserving of their accolades. Reiner must have felt as though he never should have even been there, and he never really received the Armored Titan on his own merit. This, in conjunction with still not getting the respect and love and adoration from his father, despite doing everything he did, really must have done a number to his already very low self-esteem. In a way, everything he'd worked up to at that point had been for nothing, and it might explain his behavior after Marcel's death. I would say that Marcel's death itself and events following it were a key turning point for Reiner's character. After Marcel's death, Annie and Berthold were convinced that the mission had failed as they had lost the Jaw Titan and the plan had been sullied. Consequently, they wanted to return back home, however, Reiner did not. Reiner knew at that point there was really no turning back for either of them, but especially for him. What was he going back for? To a father that refused to love him? To a nation that rejected his race? To prove everyone right that he really wasn't fit to be a warrior? From his point of view, there was no turning back, as the three of them would end up being eaten by the new Titan hosts. The turning point in question is after Annie beats up Reiner. Reiner tackles her to the ground, saying, implying that he will take over Marcel's role in the group as the leader of the squad. I would say that it was a breaking point for Reiner, as everything he knew to be true up to that point was false. He really wasn't supposed to be there. Well, that version of him anyway. Guilt must have also played a role too, since Marcel died protecting Reiner, and the loss of the Jaw Titan was also on him. The only thing that could have been done was to rise to the occasion, that being the infiltration of Paradis by becoming a soldier and living amongst the devils.
そりゃ無責任ってもんだ。俺たちは兵士だろ。いくら不利な状況でも逃げてはいけない時がある。それよりおい、見ろ。
ああ、兄か。また教官にバレないようにうまいことサボってるな。
兵士とはどうあるべきか教えてやろうじゃないか。
As a soldier, Reiner worked amongst the rest of the scout regiment in the Survey Corps. This was a means to get on the front lines and locate the founding Titan. To our characters like Eren and Armin, Reiner was perceived to be an older brother-like figure, and a role he played may be a bit too much for his own good. You see, as we mentioned earlier, as a child, Reiner wasn't really praised or respected for really anything. He had low self-esteem and no real redeeming qualities in combat. Reiner wanted to be a hero, the savior of humanity, in order to prove his worth to his countrymen and to himself due to living a life full of social rejection. You could say that this molded him into the hero archetype and even maybe develop a hero complex. The hero complex, sometimes called the hero syndrome or the savior complex, is when someone strives to be the hero of the situation. No matter the situation or the odds, they want to be the ones that save the day. This makes sense given his desires in the past. It could be the case that working for the Survey Corps provided him with the avenue for this repressed desire to manifest, albeit in strange circumstances. I believe that the catalyst for this was actually going over to Paradis and seeing that these so-called devils were actually real people fighting for some form of freedom, just like he was. This parallel was even brought to the surface by Eren Yeager when he said, "We can also look into Reiner's point of view on the Eldians when he talks to his family at the dinner table. They ask him what the devils are like, and Reiner sarcastically says,
突然芋を食い出した奴がいた。教官が咎めると悪びれる様子もなく答えた。うまそうだから盗んだと。
This illustrates how Reiner did see them as genuine human beings, thus making it easier for his desire to be a hero or this older brother-like figure to manifest, as it wouldn't have been possible with real devils or real monsters, really truly horrible people. It was probably why it was easy for Reiner to fit in the Survey Corps, and even open up to Eren slightly about his homeland and wanting to return back there. A not so false lie, after all. Ultimately, Reiner's soldier persona, regardless of it being a ruse, was the person who he meant to be and who he wanted to be back home. As a soldier, he was perceived as trustworthy, reliable, strong, and most of all, competent. His soldier persona was congruent with his true values. To an extent, this was so drastic that he even risked his life on multiple occasions. One being when he saved Connie in the tower from the Titan. He did this by getting his arm chomped on to prevent Connie from being eaten. Hell, he was even willing to jump out of a window and sacrifice himself. He is more similar to Eren, the suicidal maniac, than we think. Boho even notices this, saying,
昔のライナーは戦士だった。今は違う。
たちはガキで何一つ知らなかったんだよ。こんな奴らがいるなんて知らずにいれば、俺はこんな半端なクソ野郎にならずに済んだのに。もう俺には何が正しいことなのかわからん。ただ俺のすべきことは自分のした行いや選択に対し戦士として最後まで責任を果たすことだ。ライダーやるんだな。今ここで。勝負は今ここで決める。
Eventually, Reiner reaches a major breaking point from all the mental stress of living this fake life. This leads him to reveal to Eren that he and Bertholdt are the Armored and Colossal Titans, and if that he goes with them, the wall will not be breached. A fight between Titan Eren and the Survey Corps and the Armored and Colossal Titans ensue. From this point, the facade is over and the mask is broken. The warrior inside Reiner has reawoken. Or has it? At the beginning of this video, I spoke about identity and its importance on a grander scale. I also mentioned a psychological disorder called dissociative identity disorder, referring to a person having multiple personalities and unconsciously switching between them. The main cause of DID is believed to be severe and prolonged trauma experienced during childhood, including emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. In the case of Reiner, the first major incidence we see of his DID is after Marco's death. Marco was a close friend to Reiner's soldier persona, as he was generally a very kind and selfless person, but also quite clever. Too clever, in fact, that he overheard Reiner and Bertholdt talking, and as they say, ultimately he knew too much. As a tragic consequence, Reiner decided that he needed to be fed to a Titan and killed. The Titan devours Marco as the three escape, and with horrific expressions, watch the nightmare unfold. However, in a shocking turn of events, Reiner's reaction is a stark contrast from that of his companions. Almost as though he forgot what had actually happened in the moments prior, as he is shell-shocked to witness Marco is being eaten and breaks into tears. In this instance, it's clear that his mental state has begun to fracture, and this provides some strong evidence of him having DID. Some believe that this is a result of the overwhelming amount of guilt that Reiner felt, leading to him completely repressing it. I'd say that this guilt led to the onset of this psychological fissure, and this would have been the natural reaction for Reiner in his soldier persona state. The reasons why he got so attached to this identity, as stated earlier. Next major scenario where Reiner elicits behavior akin to dissociative identity disorder is atop the trees when Reiner and Bertholdt capture Eren and Ymir. Despite all the calamity he caused, he began going off on a monologue about how he's glad that the walls didn't get taken down, how hard they've worked, and that they should get promoted for their efforts, and how he even thinks that Krista might have the hots for him. Eren is flabbergasted and disgusted by how Reiner is speaking after everything he's done. Reiner is visibly confused and apologetic that he might have upset Eren. Apprehensively, Bertholdt reminds Reiner that and Reiner freaks out and snaps back into his original warrior persona. I believe that this scene cements the idea that Reiner has two identities, and unlike the former example, we can literally see him get triggered and experience a mental shift going back to the warrior. In Reiner's mind, the past and the future were not intertwined but were separate entities, the complication being the discrepancy between his duty as a warrior and his unconscious desire to play the role like he did as a soldier. In addition to the guilt, the onset of this disorder could have largely been a product of the emotional trauma he experienced as a child, resenting being rejected and treated the way that he did. Being this admired figure in the Scouts might have been an easier role to slip into, as it was far better than where he'd originally come from, who he was back in Mali. One might say that it emerged from escapism, the same way that people escape their mediocre existences to simulate or emulate feelings of importance or power vicariously. As you could imagine, he pretty much ended up a wreck and a concoction of all his life stress, emotional instability, and deep repressed trauma. Two broken men.
ただやるべきことをやる。ただ進み続ける。それしかねえだろ。
そうだよな。
巨人を一匹残らず駆逐するんだろう。お前ならやれる。
The impact of all the traumatic life events that Reiner goes through boils to the surface in Attack on Titan Season 4. He is clearly a guilt-ridden and damaged man. A prime example of what we can look at is how one of his behaviours have been extremely exaggerated due to all the stress. Remember when I compared Reiner to Eren due to their high willingness to risk their lives? Well, I would say it was for a different reason. Well, I would make the argument that unconsciously Reiner wanted to die the entire time, so that whenever the opportunity presented itself, he would take it, especially if the cause was a noble one, so he could die living the hero fantasy. Before I go on into instances of him doing this, let's look at how it's affected him psychologically. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the mental condition known as post-traumatic disorder, PTSD, is one of the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders amongst veteran ex-soldiers. One of the symptoms being mentally reliving the events over and over again, like in their sleep. I would say that Reiner Braun definitely suffers from PTSD due to the horrors of killing many innocent people, and the death of Marcel was definitely traumatic to him because he blamed himself for it. This is particularly evident in Reiner's nightmares after he returned back from Paradis. It has been shown that those with PTSD have a higher likelihood to commit suicide due to the distressing traumas acquired across their lives, which ultimately makes their lives too hard to bear living and going on. In the case of Reiner, he was criticized by Polko at Fort Slava for being way too willing to throw his life away, and criticized for being like his brother, his older brother, Marcel. During a conversation with his family about what the Devils were like, Reiner expresses in a sarcastic fashion that they were just like normal people. His whole worldview and perspective had changed. After this, Reiner goes into a room alone and sticks a rifle in his mouth and attempts to kill himself. He stops himself as he realizes he still has a purpose, albeit small, to help warrior candidates like Falco. This shows that after all Reiner has experienced, he will still take an opportunity to be that adored older brother figure that everyone looks up to. Though despite this, Reiner has lost the will to live, and upon meeting Eren, he wishes for him to kill him. After Eren transforms into a Titan, and he does have the chance to die, but he doesn't, as he transforms into the Armored Titan to save Falco. From the making of this video, the series is not yet concluded, and neither has Reiner's story arc, but I would predict that he will continue along the same fashion of trying to be the hero the way that he was a soldier, while still being the warrior. Reiner is an extremely tragic character, potentially suffering from multiple mental disorders like DID, PTSD, and depression. Reiner's broken psychology could be attributed to all the trauma that he accumulated throughout his life, and to the rejection. He had the chance to live the life that he dreamed of, then having to go back to it, to a life that he never really wanted in the first place, to questioning what was even right to do, what even the right thing was. In a way, all the horrors of Attack on Titan have affected Reiner. He is a product of what war and nationalism can do to a single person. He also poses the question to us, the viewers: should we believe everything we read? The consequences of believing an ideology and then shown with indisputable evidence that it's incorrect can have catastrophic consequences and can drive us insane. In summary, Reiner was just a boy who wanted love and acceptance in a racist and oppressive society where War was the only way for him to show his worth. By becoming what society wanted, he discovered what he wanted, to be loved and accepted. The soldier was who Reiner Braun always wanted to be. The warrior was who he had to be. This was so true in fact that he developed two personas to accommodate these purposes. Unfortunately though, who society wanted him to be was wrong, and who he wanted to be was no longer possible, leading to Reiner Braun being two broken men. So, hope you guys enjoyed that. Another fun one to make. I really like doing these longer psychological analyses. I'll be doing more soon. I'm just going to be doing more of this. But yeah, I've been Sirlance.
Adrenaline pumping through my veins, now I'm feeling the thrill. Call me Itachi, you won't see me. Tsukuyomi. Undeniable.